Okay, right along with those serious times of losing our two babies and things, there was also some humorous times with our kids growing up. Barbara and Ross Valdez was one of the boys in our church. His parents were, well, his dad was Spanish, and his mother was white. But anyway, Ross got a I don't remember where it come from, but somebody gave us a live alligator. It was about a foot long, and they didn't. Whoever had it, their parents wouldn't let them have it anymore. So it always ended up at the Heiney's place with us, and so we had the alligator, and Ross was over visiting one time, and this alligator would eat raw hamburger, and so Ross was feeding it, and anyway, it was snapping, and in the process, both Ross and Barbara got bit by it and broke the skin, and they were bleeding, and Barbara was later laughing about the thing that now her and Ross were blood brothers and sisters because they'd both got bit by the same alligator. But later, this alligator died, and so I had learned to do taxidermy work when I was down in Oklahoma, and at Hammond, and so Barbara and I skinned out this alligator, and we mounted this alligator, had it in a position where it sat up on its hind legs and leaned back on its tail, and it had its mouth open and had its two legs out, and so Barbara was always involved in sewing and this type of thing, so she made a little hat for it and a little skirt, and this alligator became a very focal place on our in our living room, and a lot of laughs and so on and so forth. But right along about this same time, somebody gave our kids a duck. It was Easter time, and somebody, they was always giving, people were giving bunnies and chickens and ducks and stuff like this to their children, and somebody got a duck and they couldn't, and their folks wouldn't let them keep it. So of course it ended up at the Heiney household, and it ended up with Barbara, and for some reason, I have no idea where she got this name, but it became Herkimer, and Herkimer thought he was a human because they'd have him in the house, and they'd get a pan of water and put him in the pan of water, and he was he'd swim around there and happy as could be. But if everybody left him, he would just squawk like everything and flop and want to follow. He thought he was a human, and so we had him for 3 weeks or a month, and our next door neighbor told the kids, he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, if you kids want to raise some ducks, he said, I'll buy a dozen ducks, and you can raise them, and then whenever it comes time to butcher them, you can have half of them for doing it. So we had a dozen plus Herkimer, and we put them out in a we had a chicken house out back of our house there on this 2-acre place we had, and we got a little kid swimming pool, and put these fill it full of water and put these ducks in it. I mean, they got to where that when it come evening, they would get out of their pool and walk around the garage and back to their chicken house, and some of the kids would lock them up, and the next morning they'd go out and open the gate, and these ducks would come around the garage and back around and back into their, and they'd do this, and they grew up to be full-size ducks. But Herkimer, somehow his oil ducks or whatever, if he was in the water very long, his feathers didn't get oil on them, and he got so heavy with his feathers soaking up the water that he couldn't get out of the swimming pool, and so they'd have to go out and get him out and set him out on the ground, and then he'd follow the other ducks, and so eventually, just before we left Haber, we had a duck killing time, and but instead of our neighbor taking his 6, we ended up with all 13 of them, and but the kids had quite a time with the pets, and we have always had pets in our home, wild stuff. We had squirrels when we were at Kickapoo, and we had squirrels and other things when we were at Hammond, and this was no different. We also had a lot of rabbits while we were there. We were out at the D store one day, and Bertie Van Shortman was a member of our church, and she was an Indian lady, had about 8 or 9 children, and when we first moved there, she kept talking about the D store, going out to the D store, and so we got acquainted with her, and what the D store was the dump ground. They'd go out to the dump ground, and she knew the fellow that was in charge of it, and it didn't take us long to know him too. And we could go out and scrounge any kind of junk, and it was unbelievable at what she found. A diamond ring that was worth several $100s out there one day, and we found some ice cream that had been packaged and dumped by the place there in town. It was still frozen, and but they'd forgot to put sugar in it, and so find all kinds of stuff. And we went out there one day, and there was rabbit hutches. There was about a rabbit hutch probably 15, 18 feet long, and it would take care of 6, 8 rabbits in it. And so, of course, the kids wanted to take it home, and they raised rabbits and sold them at the one of the stores there in town, and then they sold butcher rabbits, and there was always something going on around our home like this. And we also we had another pretty serious thing that happened in our church there, or in North Haber. Barbara babysat for a lady, and who had a little baby, and Barbara had babysat for her several times, and one day, not when Barbara was responsible, but one day the baby wandered away from their house, and they lived about a half a block from the Milk River that ran through North Havre, and the little baby got into the river and drowned. And of course we ministered to the family what we could, but the real tragedy was that a month or so later, this mother was so distraught over losing her little baby that she told her husband that she was going to go somewhere, and she went off by herself and committed suicide, killed herself as a result of losing this baby in the Milk River. And the people in North Havre, as I said, were poor people, but we had such a close relationship with everybody that was there, and we knew almost everybody. There was a couple. The wife was a white girl, but the husband was an Indian fella, and I had related some ways to Bertie Mae, and I went by to visit him one evening, and trying to get him into church, and they looked really funny when I knocked on the door, and it was just before church on Sunday night, and I could smell they were cooking, and I saw them. They were really disturbed, and there was quite an odor with this what they were cooking, and they were really just uncomfortable with me being there, and so after a little bit I said, when are you gonna? I said, you're cooking punch, and they looked at one another, and I said, when's it going to be done? And they said, well, about 8 o'clock, 8:30, and I said, that's about time church is over. I said, I'll be by and eat supper with you. And they just, now I don't know whether you're aware of what paunch is. It's cow stomach. And I had eaten paunch. I've been in Indian work forever. And they couldn't believe. They said, preacher, you don't know what's cooking. I said, oh, yes, I do, too. And I said, it's been a long time since I've had any. And they said, well, if you want to eat something, we'll come on back. And so after church, I went by, but I told them, I said, you got any hot sauce? And they said, oh, yeah. I said, okay. So I went by, and man, she had done such a good job cooking this. Depends on how well they're cleaned. In fact, Bertie Mae always said, you don't want to clean them too good because you'll wash all the flavor out. You don't want to buy this down at the store because they wash it too much. And but I like them cleaned out pretty good. But anyway, this girl had done an excellent job, and I hadn't eaten any paunch for since I'd been in Oklahoma. So I nearly made myself sick eating so much of that, and with the hot sauce and everything. But this was the kind of relationships we had with these folks, and we, as I said, Bertie Mae introduced us to the D store, and we would go out there and pick up pieces of sheetrock and 2x4s, and just the upstairs in our house was not finished at all, and the bathroom was upstairs of all places, and the bathroom set out in the open, out in the middle of everything. No walls, no nothing up there, and so we put a petition. Well, first of all, in our bathroom, I got a whole string of kitchen cabinets that's probably 15, 18 feet long, and set those right against the slope of the roof upstairs. And so there was all of our cabinets and everything for our bathroom. And then I made the petition, and all out of 2x4s and small pieces of sheetrock that I'd put together and taped up. And then we, our boys all slept upstairs, and we did too as far as that's concerned. So I put another wall in, and then we divided the whole south edge of the upstairs into 3 rooms for the boys. Each one of them had a bunk bed. We took the bunk beds down, and the walls we made for it, I made out of 1x4s, and I made them just they weren't solid, that you could see through, and but I made shelves, just all kinds of designs, and they could put all their whatnots and junk and stuff in these from either side, and but each one of them had their own little space that was theirs, and so all of this came from the D store, and we made continual trips out there, and never did lead this old boy that was in charge of taking care of the dump ground out there, but we certainly witnessed to him and tried to share with him the Lord Jesus. And it was along this time that one of the young men that attended our church from the air base, his name was Bud Smart, and it was coming close to Christmas time, and Bud was looking forward to going home to Arkansas to visit his folks, and we were excited for him and all of this, and he took off and left, and we were looking forward to him coming back, and we got word that he was coming across Kansas, and a car veered over in front of him and hit him head on, and Bud was killed. And on his way home from his home back to Havre, and again, that's one of those tragedies that drew our church together, and we had even though his body was taken back to Arkansas, and he was he had his service there. We were in contact with his parents, and we had a memorial service in our church for him. I had his picture, and several of the men that worked with him shared experiences with him, and so we had a lot of happy times, but we had a lot of hurt times as well. But when a small congregation shares hurts together, they become, well, it's kind of like Cascade Road Baptist Church. It becomes a family, and what hurts one hurts all of us, and this is what happened when Bud was killed on his way back. These guys at the Air Force Base always was in our home. I had shared earlier that we had never had an idea who was going to be eating dinner with us on Sunday because just whoever was there and who didn't have a place to go, they may end up at our house. I can remember that we might have our family. We might have our family and the foot boys. We might have our family and 5, 6, 7 single servicemen. You never knew. And so our home was always open. Well, Lawrence was about, he must have been about 8 or 9, 7, 8, 9 along in there. And he was trying to learn to stand on his head. And he would, kind of run and try to put his hands down and stick his head down. And one Sunday afternoon, Roger Stewart, fellow from the air service, from the air base radar site, was in, and he's one of those guys that was sliding on the ice and fell, but anyway, Roger was talking to Lawrence, and Lawrence said something about standing on his head, and he said, "Well, Lawrence, I can show you how to do it real easy." And so he said, "What you do is take your hands and kneel, kind of squat down, and put your hands out in front of you, rest your elbows on your knees, and ease yourself forward and till your head goes down, and then your hands," and he said, "you make a triangle out of your 2 hands and your head, and then," he said, "you push yourself up." And so he showed Lawrence how to do this, and Lawrence spent all Sunday afternoon learning how to stand on his head, and he did. And the next morning, he woke up and it was time to go to school, and he said, "Mom," he said, "I can't go to school today." He said, "My heart's hurting." And she couldn't figure what in the world, so she rushed him down to the doctor to see the doctor. The doctor asked him, said, "Has he been doing anything different the last day or two?" And she said, "Well," said I guess yesterday afternoon he was trying to stand on his head." And the old doc grinned, and he said, "Yeah," he said, "he's pulled those muscles." But Lawrence was the only one of our kids that really ever learned to be able to stand on his head. But boy, he could he could flat stand on his head. Barbara was actively involved in her schoolwork, and she was one of her favorite classes was home ec, and she became pretty close friends of the teacher, and right along this same time, Deloris was attending the college at Havre, and was working on a teacher certificate. So she was carrying full load in college, and so Barbara did a lot of the cooking, and would especially have evening meals ready when Deloris come in from school. But and Deloris had done a lot of cooking and things when she was a girl, and so Barbara chose as one of her projects canning, home canning, and gosh, she canned peaches and pears and cherries, and of course we had a garden, and she canned meat, and she canned fish. We went salmon snagging, and she canned just a whole bunch of different things, and so her teacher told her, said, "Well, Barbara, you bring those canned goods to school." And Barbara said, "I have about 30 or 35 quarts of stuff that is canned." And her teacher just couldn't believe that she had canned that much. And she said, "Now, you did this by yourself?" And Barbara said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, I'll come by your house." And so she came by and was amazed. And, of course, Barbara had the thing I remember especially was her peaches. Those peach halves were all set down in the quart jars, and they were as pretty as pictures. I mean, and the teacher was just overwhelmed at what Barbara had accomplished. And by the end of the school year, when we got ready to leave, Barbara had received the Betty Crocker award for homekeeping, and mainly from her cooking there with her canning. And I mentioned the canning of fish. My dad and mother came up almost every year, and Dad would come to hunt, and we would fish, and we found out that over around Flathead Lake, where we had our camp, there was the Flathead River that run through there, and there was a kokanee salmon that was about 12, 14 inches long, weigh about a pound, and you snagged them. And so Dad and Mom and I decided we're going to go over and snag salmon. And the first year we went, we caught I think we caught about 175, something like that. And it's kind of a neat thing. You can actually see these fish out in the water. The water's 18 inches, 3 foot deep, and but it's clear enough that you can see these shadows of fish out there going upstream. Mm-hmm. And so what we would do, we had a big treble hook that was about, I guess 2 inches across, and three barbs to it, and we'd tie a white rag on it, and it had a weight on it, and you'd throw it out, and then you'd kind of tug it, and you could see where your hook was because of that white flag, and you get it about a foot 18 inches above the fish upstream from it, and work it where it was about a foot from where that fish was, and when you jerked, the current swept it, and you hooked that fish, and you could catch almost every one of them. And so the first year we got, I don't know, there's 130, 40 of them, something like that. The next year we went back, we took our whole family. We got over 380 of them. The limit was 35, 40 a day. And that year we took we got a cabin, and we took our pressure cookers, and we'd clean fish. We'd catch fish, clean them, and take them to the cabin, and Deloris and Barbara would can them, and we'd go back and fish some more, and so we ended up with over 360 of those salmon. Of course, tremendous eating. But,
I like salmon.
And also I got into smoking, and we'd smoke these fish, and it was a part of making a living, and so we had a gal that came to our church, a student out at the university, and she was tied in with child evangelism. I don't know whether you're familiar with child evangelism, but it's an organization that pinpoints children, and they have a lot of methods in which they try to share the gospel with children. And Janice was talking to Deloris after a Sunday school class one Sunday morning, and that she was teaching, and she was all excited. She said, I shared the gospel with these children this morning, and every one of them became Christians. And that sent a flag up real quick. And Deloris said, every one of them? And she said, yes, every one of them gave their heart to Jesus. And Deloris said, that's strange. She said, Lawrence was in that classroom. Yeah, he became a Christian too. And she said, Janice, he's been a Christian for over a year. His daddy led him to the Lord. And but anyway, Janice was one of those individuals that everybody they talk to become Christians, and it doesn't always work that way. Now, Lawrence had about a year before that had shared his request with me that he needed to become a Christian, and he had come forward during one of our worship services and then made a public profession of faith and given his heart to the Lord. And this was a neat thing, that God gave me the opportunity of leading all four of my children to the Lord. The three older ones was while we were at Hammond, but Lawrence was there in Havre. I had an embarrassing but a humorous experience. We had a Sunday night Bible study, and then we had a worship service, and so I was teaching the Bible one evening, and standing in front of a group of about 12, 14, I guess, and I become aware that the zipper on my pants had broken, and pants was gapped open, and I didn't know how to deal with the thing, and Deloris saw it, and Deloris started trying to motion to me, and get my attention to it, and I thought, okay. I said, you know what? I said, my wife is trying to signal me that my zipper's broken. About that time, I took off my coat, and I said, but we can take care of that without any problem. And so I just dropped the coat down across the front and tied it around the back, and went on. And Deloris was just humiliated. She said, after it was over, she'd about ready to kill me. And I said, honey, you gave me the perfect out. And but anyway, I got my zipper taken care of. It was during this time also. I've talked about that our providing food and stuff was a part of our ministry. Back during that time that we were salmon snagging, that particular year, hog prices, just the bottom fell out of them. You could buy a hog on the hoof for a nickel a pound. So a 300-pound hog would cost you $30, and we were coming back from salmon snagging, and I had a preacher friend that had some people in his church at Shelby, which was 100 miles from where we were at, and they had some hogs, and I made an agreement to buy one of these hogs. And what we did, we just as we come back from salmon snagging, we went by and went out, and the fella, we killed this hog, and he lifted it up on his tractor, and we cleaned it out, washed it out, and we had a Rambler station wagon, and we just laid it up on top of it, tied it on, and of course our kids were humiliated, and especially so because the Havre Blue Ponies football team was playing for the state championship, and all of their friends were on their way home from Havre, and from Kalispell, and they all knew our station wagon. And every time there'd be a busload of kids go by, our kids would bury themselves in the back seat of the car, because here's this hog up on top, and we pulled into a filling station to get gas, and the guy was filling it up, and he was looking at this hog, and my dad stepped around and he said, "Yeah," he said, "this is a wild hog, and we killed this thing." But along this same time, we bought several of the guys from our church bought pigs because they were so cheap, and so I told our kids, I said, "Okay, now we're gonna," and we bought them live, and put them out there in a pen that we had on our 2 acres. And I told the kids, I said, "Okay, now one of these days when the weather begins to cool down," it was in the fall, I said, "when it cools down," I said, "we're going to butcher hogs." And I said, "You kids are not going to go to school." I said, "You're going to get in on really old-fashioned hog killing." And I think we had 5 hogs. We had a couple and some of the other guys from our church. And we rigged up a barrel, 55-gallon barrel, and we'd built a fire under it, got water boiling, and we'd dip these hogs down in there and scrape them, and then went about butchering them. Well, all the kids were home, and they were all involved in it, and plus the guys from the church there that had bought hogs, and about the time we got them scraped, it started snowing, and it was the most beautiful, quiet snow. And by the time we got done with these hogs, there was 10-12 inches of snow on the ground, and we could take the head or the half of it or the ribs or the hindquarters or whatever, and lay it right out on the snow where it cooled down. And our kids still talk about that hog killing time, and I wanted them to experience what I had experienced when I was a kid, because I remembered those times when my father had butchered hogs, and it was a very special time. So we did this as well.